Good morning. Let's go ahead and get started. Lord God, we are thankful for this day. Every day we wake up, Lord, it is a gift from you. It is a day that you've given us to not just enjoy for our own pleasure, although you do fill our days with wonderful things, but God, they are gifts because it gives us another opportunity to bring you glory and to honor you and to praise your name. And God, we are especially thankful for days like Sunday, or the first day of the week, where we get to gather together with your people. We get to join our hearts and our minds together and talk about your Son and his great gift and sacrifice. Talk about what you've given for us through our lives and what you have worked out, and talk about the ways that you have spread your gospel, that great news that gives us hope. And God, we are just thankful that these days that we have, they are days where we might have a chance to lead somebody else to you, and we ask for those opportunities. Or God, that might be an opportunity to serve others, and Lord, that if you can put those things in our paths, we're thankful. And God, it might even be an opportunity to suffer for your name. We might, like Paul, get thrown in jail. We might suffer punishment. We might be despised by the people around us because of our faith. And God, if that's what's in our future, we're thankful for those moments too, because they are opportunities where we have to share in suffering with your Son, and that makes it worth it. God, we are just continually reminded that this life that we have here is not about us, it's about serving you. And we thank you that we get those opportunities, and it's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right, we are going to be moving into talking about the city of Rome, and talking, just kind of getting a background, a cultural look at what the city of Rome was like. Maybe that'll help us have a better appreciation. And then for the last 3 classes of the quarter, Wednesday, Sunday, and next Wednesday, we'll talk about lessons from the book of Acts. So I would like, just as a warning, I know this class, because we've been dealing a lot with cultural or historic or geography or social situation, and I've done a lot of talking over the past 23 classes. I plan for you to do a lot of the talking for the last 3 classes. So just go ahead and just spend some time this week. This is your homework. Spend some time between now and Wednesday scribbling down a few notes about what you find to be the most important themes from the book of Acts, or maybe even more specifically, what are some of the greatest lessons we have from the book of Acts. I will come prepared with some of my own, but I'm really more interested in yours. We have literally spent 15 months with the book of Acts now, which sounds ridiculous, I know. And Marshall told me that before they came here, they had spent like the previous 24 months in the book of Acts. So he's really ready to be finished with this book for a little bit. But it is a great book, and there are great lessons, and I know it is a book we are well studied in, and therefore I think it would be good for us to share what lessons we have learned, maybe even take some of the the passages in there and look at them more from a practical standpoint as we finish up the book. So that's your homework. Go ahead and scribble down some notes about themes or lessons, practical lessons we learned from the book of Acts. Okay? Everybody got that? Yes? No? I will not remember to tell you at the end of class, so I need to know that you know that now. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into our lesson for today, talking about the book of Acts. If you'll turn in the book of Acts to chapter 28, Acts chapter 28, that is where we get to this section about Rome. Very last chapter of the book. We know that we left them shipwrecked on Wednesday and talked about ship travel and the difficulties with ship travel and that sort of thing. But they are shipwrecked on the island of Malta. They were there for 3 months. Paul, how did Paul do there as far as an evangelist? Is he successful, unsuccessful? What do you think? Yeah, how do you do? Was he successful in Malta? Okay, so that's one of the weird things about the situation in Malta. I was expecting somebody to go, he did great, did he? But it's one of those. What's interesting in Malta is that everywhere Paul has been before, it makes a big deal about his work, his labor, that he went around teaching, that he would meet in the synagogue, and he would talk to people, and some would accept the gospel and some would refuse the gospel. And then he would move into the Gentile community, and he'd have some successes in some places, and in other places he was run out of town and those sort of things. Here in Malta, what does it focus on instead? Yeah, they accepted him as a And I would go a step further than cordial and say they were really impressed with him. What did they compare him to? A god. I mean, they're like, whoa, this guy's amazing. Why did they find Paul to be amazing? Snake didn't kill him. And then what did he go on to do? He's healing people. And so they're bringing their sick to him. So you look there, Publius's father, yes? Well, and hold on to that thought, okay? Yeah, well, and so you've got this episode with Publius's father, and he heals his father from dysentery. And then, Paul did that. The rest of those on the island who had diseases also came and were healed. And they heaped many honors on us. When we sailed, they gave us what we needed. After 3 months, we sailed on. It doesn't talk about him preaching. It doesn't talk about him starting a church here. It doesn't. But what do we typically see accompany miracle working? The gospel, a delivery of a message. It doesn't say that about Malta. I don't think it is a stretch to assume that about Malta. But we're not really told the details of that side of what he did here. It could be maybe there was a circumstance of some sort that caused him not to, because of being a prisoner, or because of their culture, or, I don't know. It is interesting to me that Luke doesn't include that detail. Luke's there. Like Luke's there also on the island with him. He doesn't talk about the spiritual work of Paul as much as he does the physical healing work. Marshall? Paul hadn't mentioned it. Yeah. Well, let me tell you about, nope, I'm not going to tell you. Everywhere Paul goes, he tells people about Jesus. And so that's the reason again, I have a hard time believing he doesn't do some work in teaching people the gospel, teaching people about Jesus, sharing the message, using the miracles he's doing and the influence he's gaining in order to point people to Jesus. That is who Paul is. That is what Paul always does. And so I think we would be, it is a further stretch to assume he didn't than it is to assume that he did. I think I'm at least safe in saying that. Okay, Larry?
He never, all the recorded miracles that he did, were never done for himself.
Yep.
He always give the credit where it belongs.
Yep. I mean, and again, I heal you in the name of Jesus. I don't think that was a whispered, covert, secret, in the closet type of, Paul's not taking credit for himself. He's doing it as an example to open up the door for the gospel. And again, I don't think that it is a stretch to assume that here about Malta. But we do know they leave Malta after 3 months, and which, again, they're not far from Rome, but they leave there joining on a ship, and they make it all the way back to Rome. And of course, we know that in the story, this is here, grab here, verse 16. When we entered Rome, Paul was allowed to live by himself with the soldier who guarded him. So he's on house arrest. And we talked about that a couple of classes ago, what house arrest would have been like. So here's a map of the city of Rome from the 1st century. It's not a very pretty map, but it is at least kind of gives you an idea. I will say the thing that astonishes me about this map is just how busy it looks. Does that stand out to you here about this map too? And obviously this is not all the buildings, but it does point out a lot of the major buildings in ancient Rome. And it is a very busy city. If you ever look at reconstructions of ancient Rome based on what we know about the city, that is also the impression you get. I actually had a video, again, that's not going to work for you, but I really got to figure that out. But it was kind of like a flyover digital remake of the ancient city of Rome. And the buildings here, you know, every other city has a lot of buildings, but they're all pretty low to the ground. They're pretty short. Rome is massive. Like, it's not only a large city, but the buildings are tall. There's just, it is an impressive feat of engineering, this ancient city. And so it's not just busy as far as there's a lot of building. It's busy in the fact of you walk through the streets and you've got 5 or 6 story buildings on each side of you. For us, that's no big deal. Walk through downtown Birmingham and you get the same impression. But for an ancient city, that was huge. And so it's pretty impressive. If you've not seen the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, and several of you are nodding, so I assume you've seen it. I can't remember as far as content if I need to issue a content warning. So if there is bad content, just know that my brain has not remembered it, and I'm not trying to make you watch something that has content issues. But I do appreciate the movie from strictly a Bible teacher viewpoint of it. Really does give a very clear picture of what the different ancient cities were like, especially Rome. It shows several scenes there of of the city of Rome, and you do get an idea. That movie is pretty accurate as far as what the city would have looked like, and the size of the buildings and those sorts of things. There's even a scene in there where Russell Crowe, they're kind of unloaded there in the outside of the Colosseum because he's a gladiator, and they make a comment of, have you ever seen a building like this? And his comment is, I didn't even know this was achievable by the hands of men. And that's kind of the impression that Rome wanted to make, that this wasn't just an impressive city. This was a city that was constructed by the gods. Because who is Caesar? He's a god. And so it's giving that impression, trying to impress you with the size and the majesty of the building. If you see any remakes of Rome, you are impressed with that. So, Ron? Yeah. It was actually in construction. A lot of that outer city was being constructed at the time, and I believe the outer wall was being constructed at the time. Not complete, but constructed. So it is one of those, Rome was always expanding. Like that's one of the things you'll notice about Rome. They were always trying to continue impressing people. But yes, you are right. It would go through these phases of growth. It is the most prominent city of the first century world, as you would expect. It is the Roman Empire for a reason. This is the capital of the empire. It is where Caesar dwelt. It is just an impressive city. It is often called the City of Seven Hills, and one of the reasons for that is it was built on a geographical location where there were 7 hills, and so the city itself eventually, as Ron pointed out, eventually kind of expanded to include all 7 hills. And so it is, all those, I'll give you the names of the hills in just a moment, but it is, again, I point that out for you for this. We don't typically think of cities in that from that viewpoint, because when we need to get across town, what do? We jump in a car and go. Or if you're in a really major city, you jump on the tram or the subway and you go. How did they get across the city? They walked. You think they noticed hills? A lot more than we do, right? The only reason we notice hills is if we drive a stick shift, and who does that anymore, right? And that's you needed to get across town. It was a long walk, and it was not necessarily a difficult walk, but it was not like just a nice flat stroll. There was oftentimes, especially if you're pushing a cart or you're trying to get some of your wares across town, this was a lot of work. It was a very different style of living. By myth, the city of Rome was established in 753 BC. I will say, just a bragging dad, as I prepped this lesson, I kept thinking, I need to just let Gibson get up and teach this class, because he is fascinated with ancient Rome, and he knows way more about it than I do. But it was established by myth in 753 BC by the twins, Remus and Romulus, who were descendants of Aeneas, who are mentioned, he's mentioned in the Iliad, and the story of some of the wars he fought is that story. But again, archaeological data suggests that it was probably also founded in the 8th century BC. And as far as we know, probably, while much of the story of the founding of Rome and the empire and Romulus and Remus and all that are exaggerated, there's probably some truth in it. That just what has been passed down gets blown out. Every time you tell a story, it gets bigger, right? That's probably the way it is with Rome also. From 750 to about 300 BC, I thought about digging into all of these, but it doesn't really help the class per se. But there were a lot of various battles that took place. At one point, Rome was beaten and burned down, but then it was reestablished by the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire itself was not destroyed. So it got rebuilt. There were several victorious battles that were a part of the establishment of Rome. But ultimately, Rome and the rulers of Rome ended up taking over the entire Italian peninsula, what we currently call Italy. There were several different groups or empires that were a part of that peninsula, and eventually Rome just was able to push them all out or destroy them completely, and that really established Rome as the center of the country. So of Rome, whenever it was first established, there were 7 legendary kings of Rome. So these were kind of the very beginning. Romulus, of course, first, being the first great victor, and then you've got these other 6 men that followed. The problem with this, as is typically the place, is that power corrupts, right? So as they continued to pass down the power from one ruler to the next, each ruler got more evil, to the point to where eventually the people themselves revolted against their ruler, and really it wasn't the people as much as it was the rich. But the rich decided to revolt against their ruler, and so ultimately, eventually, there was an establishment of a senate, and you've got the patristic society and the plebeian part of the society. We'll come back and talk about that in a moment. There's also the 7 hills of Rome. It's interesting, you go back and look through Roman history, there's a lot of numerology attached to it, or significant numbers, and it's interesting, their significant numbers are very similar to the Bible's significant numbers, because that is all very cultural. So the number 7 was very important to the city of Rome. It's the city of 7 hills. We have the 7 legendary kings. So 7 keeps popping up. You'll also have 12 pop up quite regularly in Roman history. What's the others? We also in the Bible, you got 7 and 12 that are often talked about, and talked about not just from a realistic setting, but the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons of Jacob. You've got, even in the book of Revelation, the 7 bowls, the 7 trumpets. You see a lot of that popping up. And so that was very much a cultural thing, not necessarily it doesn't always have some sort of significance attached to it. Ooh, that's tiny. All right, so good thing some of y'all are sitting up front, so you can kind of read it. All right, so there again, a long struggle, kind of a power struggle during the early days of Rome between the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians are essentially the rich old money. So they are the ones who have essentially been in power or had some sort of influence over the people. They are, essentially the ones that stick their nose up in the air at everybody else. You've got the plebeians, who are the rich new money. Okay? And the reason I say rich is because the only way you were considered to have a voice is if you were a landowner, or you had some sort of, you were had your own market or your own business, that sort of thing. And so you would, essentially there was a lot of battling between who should have the right, who should have the power, who should be able to make the decision. The old money, the ones who aren't really in business anymore, they're just living off the family name and the family money, or should it be the people who are actually out there doing the work? And so a lot of times, and the way that this would work is you would get some merchant who had moved his business to Rome, and he's very wealthy and has a lot of money, but you've got the patrician, the old money, who is living entirely off of influence, but his family has used up their money. So they don't have money anymore, but they keep everybody fooled because of the way that they live and the way that they try to maintain their influence. And so you had a lot of manipulation between the rich old money and the new money coming into town who actually have money. And so the politicians are getting favors or getting donations for votes and such from those with new money, but the new money are manipulating the patricians to get them to do what they want to do. Well, if you'll do this instead, I'll give you even more money. And so you had a lot of just political intrigue. Sounds a lot like America. We just call it lobbyists. So that's the way it works in America. But again, you get a lot of that kind of battling back and forth between the two groups of people. In 450 BC, you have what is the first Roman law code, and it was called the 12 bronze tablets, or the 12 tables. And essentially, this was a foundational document that laid out the rules as to the way the law was going to work. And because now we no longer have a dictator at this point, you've got a lot of people with their hand in the pot of making the rules. There needed to be some sort of foundation to guide them in the making of those rules. And so the 12 tables, that was essentially the foundational rules as to how all other decisions were going to be made. These were publicized. They were essentially carved out on these 12 bronze tablets. They were stuck up in the Roman Forum so that anybody could read them, so that even the plebeians could argue, well, this law doesn't match the 12 tables, and they could get laws thrown out based on the foundational rules. So the 12 tables essentially become their constitution, and then all the laws are supposed to be formed around the interpretation of the 12 tables. It included laws about legal procedures, civil rights of the lesser people, property rights, those types of things. So it was essentially just their civil law code. The Senate eventually became controlled entirely by the patricians and the plebeians, and there was no real dictator or emperor or kingly figure involved at all. So imagine, for lack of better terms, men's meetings. Because, just any of us who have been in a congregation without elders and we hear the term men's meetings, we start to shiver all over and sweat a little bit, like, ooh, that's not good. That's kind of the way Rome went for a while. We're going to put the control of our empire in the hands of many, many people who are all in it to get what they can get out of it. They're not in it for the good of the empire. And obviously that eventually starts to fall apart and things started messing up. And so as that happened, again, with the patricians and the plebeian, who is the one making the laws? The rich. What do you think happens to the rich? They get richer. What do you think happens to the poor? They get poorer. Again, it sounds like America. I mean, it is funny if you go back and read a lot about ancient Rome. That's your reaction over and over and over again. That probably has a lot to do with the person who's writing the articles or the information about Rome, that we tend to slant it that way. By 300s or so, 350s or the late 300s, you've got Rome becoming very militaristically focused. So Rome starts to, there's a lot of generals that start popping up. Well, the patrician and the plebeians start losing their influence because the common person would rather follow the guidance of the general who's coming in and triumphing and having all these victories than that sneevely, just slimy old politician over there. And so the generals started becoming the heroes of the people, and the politicians started losing their influence. And so there started to be a lot of conflict there between the generals and the Senate. Okay? And so you've got the Punic Wars during this time, the Macedonian Wars during this time. By the time you get to about 100 years before Jesus, Rome becomes dominated essentially by these generals, these warlords, these heroes that were coming in. And so ultimately, as a result of that, it leads to Gaius Caesar Augustus. I think Julius Caesar. Sorry, I'm getting all my Caesars mixed up. So eventually, he just is a very successful general. And so the people very much turn to him. He gets turned into a consul. He gets, essentially a political position. He's still a general, so again, he's still winning the favor of the people. Eventually, he becomes a governor. As one of 3 governors of Rome, he eventually starts to battle with the other governors, starts a civil war. In about 45 BC, he essentially takes charge. He becomes the dictator of Rome, and he is very much a dictator, depending on which article or report you read. So about a year later, you've got that famous story of him being stabbed in the back by Brutus, right? Made famous by Shakespeare, okay? Otherwise, I don't think we would care so much. But I did see a great meme this past week on the 15th of March, which is the anniversary of Caesar's death, with a bottle of Caesar dressing with a steak knife in the back of it. Anyway, essentially, Brutus and Cassius get defeated by Mark Antony and Octavian becomes the sole leader of Rome by the time you get to 29 BC. He establishes himself as the absolute ruler and takes the title Augustus. And so he becomes the Caesar Augustus that we read about. He is probably the leader, I believe he is the leader at the birth of Jesus. And so now we're moving into the biblical story, what's going on in Rome during the time of Jesus and those other events. Okay? So I know that was a long history lesson to talk about Rome, but Rome is important. Like the Rome is the seat of everything that is happening in the Roman Empire. So having an understanding of what's going on in Rome matters. What you'll find in Rome is that essentially if you take any other city of the Roman Empire and multiply its prestige and its power and its problems by, say, 100, that you've got Rome. So all of the things we've talked about with the other cities, whether we're talking about Corinth and or Athens and its devotion to the idol work. You've got Corinth and it's very focused on political things. Athens very focused on education. We've talked about a lot of different cities and a lot of different, essentially, personalities of the different cities. Rome is essentially a schizophrenic version of all of it. That's what we're dealing with here. Pretty much Rome was it was a place where there was a mess happening all the time. So while Augustus and the other emperors very much wanted peace among the empire, you know where the one place you could go and not have peace was? Caesar's backyard. That's the way it goes, right? He can push, be very strong everywhere else, but there was always battling going on between the emperor and the Senate, and who was going to have power and who was going to make what rules. And some emperors were very strong-handed, and some emperors were very lenient with the Senate. And so you get a lot of those different personalities. And as you notice, as you go through the Roman emperors, there were a lot of emperors in a short period of time. I know you probably can't read all that. That's all first century emperors. All of them. So you're looking at that many Caesars or that many emperors in just a short period of time. There's a reason for that. Like you don't have 40-year-long Caesars. They're always being assassinated. They're always, several of them, like Nero, committed suicide. It was just a mess to deal with. Some of the emperors were absolutely, by historical standards, insane, like Nero. Literally went insane as an emperor. It was just, there was a lot of incest, a lot of sin, a lot of buying people off, a lot of killing people in the background. Several of the Caesars killed their own parents, their own children, and all of that sort of stuff. It was just a horrible mess to deal with. And so, just to give you a framework, the story of the Bible essentially takes place from Augustus down to Nero. So the first small grouping of those emperors. But you notice after Nero, Gaius, 2 years, Otho, not even a year, Aulus Vitellius, not even a year long. There's just a lot of, we'll just kill him and get him out of the way. That's the way it happened. For Paul's story particularly, you've got it happening essentially just during the time of Claudius and Nero. So the whole book of Acts essentially takes place in that very short, you include Caligula too for the early part of the book of Acts, but a very short stretch of time. And again, I think because, and I don't know about you, oftentimes I make certain assumptions about the Bible. You read through the Bible and it seems like, wow, that's a long story, right? It's not. Especially by the time you get to the New Testament. The New Testament really, pretty much all of it takes place within a stretch of just a few decades. The bulk of the stories, just a few decades. Not very long at all. And so Paul's story itself, even though it feels long, he traveled to all of these places. Man, in some ways it seems like it's very short. In some ways it seems like it really would have taken a long time. His first missionary journey, 2 years. Second missionary journey, about 3 years. Third missionary journey, 5 years. He appeals to Caesar in 50, that would have happened between 52 and 62 AD. The reason such a long stretch of time is that, remember, how long was he held in Caesarea or Caesarea? Do what? 2 years, okay, at least, maybe even longer. But we know he was kept there for 2 years, and maybe there was more to it. By the time he gets shipped off to Rome, we know that the end of the book of Rome leaves him having been in Rome for how long? Another 2 years, right? But it doesn't end at the end of his story. The book of Acts leaves us on a cliffhanger. We don't know what happens to Paul. So according to tradition, he probably was imprisoned there in Rome about 4 years by the time he actually appeared before Nero. And again, to keep this in perspective, the emperor he appealed to, Nero, right? Nero is, pretty much for the whole time he is going through all of that mess. Nero, at the beginning of his reign, while he had done some pretty despicable things, was actually a decent ruler at the beginning. But about 2 years, 3 years into being an emperor, he starts going crazy and doing crazy things. So the first time that Paul appeared to Nero, he was actually probably, depending on the timelines that you look at, probably still sane, probably still listening, probably still able to make easy judgment. But by the time you get to the second time, because according to tradition, Paul was actually set free during his first trial. He probably went out and did another missionary journey, according to tradition. He probably made it all the way to Spain, according to tradition. But at some point, he gets arrested again, and he is brought back before Nero. And in 68 AD, he is beheaded, which is the death that was given to a Roman citizen. So the second time, he does not get set free. And again, there's some debate as to whether 2 Timothy is written at the end of his first imprisonment or whether it is written around 67 AD at the second imprisonment. I personally think the second one myself, that he is kind of making his final comments to Timothy before he knows how this court case is going to go this time. And again, Nero's insanity was a fairly well-known problem across the Roman Empire. And so we would assume Paul knew about Nero's problem. And again, Paul knew people from Caesar's household. He would have probably been told some of those details in his second imprisonment. So I imagine it was pretty easy to predict he wasn't going to get free again. Dallas? Yeah, and that conflict that led to the destruction of Jerusalem was about 3 years long, if I remember correctly. So all of that would have been starting about the time Paul was going to go before Caesar. So how is Caesar going to feel toward a Jew? Not favorably, right? Like that I mean, and that's absolutely right. That makes a difference, Ron? Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So there was a large Jewish presence in ancient Rome. We don't always think about that side of it. There were, according to some estimates, around 50,000 Jews in Rome. There was actually a section, I don't know if you noticed on the map I showed earlier, but I'll go back and show you if we got time at the end. But there was a section called the Jewish Quarter. So, I mean, they had like their own area of Rome. It would have been a very easy way for Paul to find all the Jews, and in his case, for the Jews to find him, but to send word to the Jews that he wants to meet with them and those sorts of things. So there was Jewish persecution by Rome before this point. We know that Aquila and Priscilla were kicked out of the city. Why? Jewish persecution, okay? But as Ron pointed out, it wasn't really until 64 AD that you've got the Christians being picked on by Rome. But there, yes, we have the story of the Jew or the Christian. Fires started all the time in ancient Rome. It was, again, the buildings were so large and so cramped that it was, if a fire started, guess what? Fire spread. It spread pretty easily. And so that was a very common thing. But the tradition says Nero wanted to rebuild a section of Rome on behalf of his own honor. And the best way to do that was just to set it on fire and get rid of what was there. But he didn't want to be blamed for the fire, and so he blamed it on those dastardly Christians because no one liked the Christians. We'll talk about why in just a moment, but no one liked the Christians, so it was an easy thing to blame it all on. And so maybe that's the point at which he becomes insane. I don't know, that seems pretty calculated to me. If there's ever a group to blame stuff on, let's blame it on the people no one already likes. Like that's the, but again, that very well could be the case. Rome, again, as we've talked about, was kind of the political and economic center of the Roman Empire. We've got those expressions like all roads lead to Rome. And that was the idea that every trade route ended in Rome. It was a place where everything went through Rome. That also means all ideas mixed in Rome. The population of Rome was about 1 million people by the time you get to Paul's stay there, which is a massive city in ancient terms. And so the city wall itself, and I did not verify if this is the inner city wall or the outer city wall, so be aware of that. But it was about 12 miles long, and there are some who have said that there was no other city this large until the Industrial Revolution. I have not verified that. There were some other large cities. Alexandria was very large, but I've not necessarily compared them to verify that statement. Regardless, it was an impressive city. I will say this, I don't know of any other ancient city that had the height of the city of Rome, meaning just how impressive the buildings were. It was like, literally, if you see a digital rendition of it, it's like a modern city. It is like a metropolis. It's pretty impressive. Much of the culture surrounded the Colosseum in Rome. That's not really true in a lot of other places. A lot of other places would have a Colosseum, or they would have a race course, or they would have something like that. But in Rome, a lot of the political things, the Colosseum was the ancient golf course. It's where you went to do business. It's where you went to discuss business. You would invite certain dignitaries to come, and you would be seen with them, and that was a big deal. The patricians would bring in a plebeian to the Colosseum, to their box, to their area of that they regularly had, and it was a way of just giving honor to some lesser person in order to win their favor, all that sort of thing. So it was very much like, if we've got I know in Memphis, a lot of business took place in the stadium there. Different businesses would own different boxes so that you could do business during a game and kind of wow people with that. You get a lot of that kind of stuff. The ancient Colosseum was much the same way. So just the battles of athleticism, all the way to the execution of those Christians as we fed them to wild animals, that kind of stuff. That was very much where business and life in Rome would center around that. A lot of decadence, a lot of immorality in Rome. Like I said, it is every other city times 100. It really was just an amazing place and an awful place all at the same time. They were typically very tolerant of religion in Rome, more so than you really have anywhere else, except for anybody who was not polytheistic. That was the one no-no, which meant what two groups of people were despised? Jews and Christians, okay? And they were considered atheists. And one of the reasons for that is, as you can imagine, Rome, more than any other city, followed the imperial cult. It was very much our emperor is God, and he is one of the gods, and therefore you people who won't accept the emperor as one of the gods, you are not a part of our city. You are not a part of us. And so they would be despised based on that detail alone. So Paul, when he gets there, he goes on house arrest. We've already talked about what that would have been like. Rented quarters. Probably there were many house arrest people kept in the same area. I doubt it was like, well, you just choose anywhere you want to be in this city. Like there would have been a guarded place where you could rent a facility and have some sort of privacy, or have some sort of, not really privacy because you got a guard with you all the time, but you would have a place where you could live as long as you could afford it, as long as you could pay for it. The church in Rome, we know, grew before Paul went there. Some records even give us details of a church in Rome as far back as 40 AD. Where would that church have come from? Do what? Day of Pentecost, and or the spreading of the church in Acts chapter 8. All these people that went home at that point, but what did they go home doing? Teaching the gospel, right? And so even in Paul's letter to Rome, I think because Paul wrote the letter to Rome, we often attribute him as being essentially like a founder of the Church of Rome. He is not. Even in his letter of Rome that he writes to the Roman, he says, I've never been there. I want to come there. I want to come there because I hear great things about you guys, and I want to strengthen you and encourage you. But he recognizes that church is an established and growing church in the book of Romans. Has issues, has problems, as any church does. But again, it's a church that's probably been around about 15 years before, maybe even 20 years before Paul even gets there. So it is a well-established church, likely met as small groups. If you look over in Romans chapter 10, again, we have this picture in our head that the church in Rome met in a congregational auditorium where they could all meet together and sing and pray and take the Lord's Supper together. Probably not the case. Romans chapter 10, starting in verse 3. I think it's 10. It's not 10. What did I mean to type in there? I'm guessing 16. Not sure how 10 showed up there, but 16. Give my greetings to Prisca and Aquila, my co-workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their own neck for my life. Not only do I thank them, but so do all the Gentile churches. Greet also the church that meets in their home. And so that idea of a gathering of Christians meeting in homes, there were probably multiple congregations in Rome. Now, maybe it was a tiny congregation that they all met there in Prisca and Aquila's home. Maybe. We don't really have details. But with it, or the assumption of it being a well-established church, oftentimes in these ancient places, you would have, it would be like us saying the church in Birmingham. But what we mean when we say that is the kingdom of God's people in Birmingham that meet in different places that are autonomous groups that have their own set of elders. But we are all the church in Birmingham because we are the kingdom in Birmingham. That's probably more of the sense of what's being said here. Again, go ahead, Keith. Well, we know some did because, like, Paul meets Priscilla and Aquila where? Corinth. And the reason they're in Corinth is why? They fled Rome because of persecution. And so we do know some did. I would imagine in most cases, even when persecution started up, they just continued on. Churches... for lack of better terms, you do what you got to do. Like but other than that, I don't really have an answer for that. Yeah, I don't know. We're just not really told answers. I do find it interesting that there is, like we mentioned, a large set of Jews there, But that large set of Jews at the heart of the empire had not heard the complaints about Paul. I find that so interesting. But they, again, for whatever reason, the Jews in Judea had no interest in pursuing Paul all the way to Rome. And so the Jews there, Paul's able to gain some influence with some of the Jews. I also think it explains Paul's heart. When you look at like Romans chapter 9 and Romans chapter 10, where he makes those kind of impassioned statements about he wished that the Jews would be saved and that they have a knowledge but not according to zeal. And he makes these statements about Jews. And you've got that letter that really deals a lot with the Jew-Gentile conflict. You can understand that when you see how large the Jewish population was in this town. That's a lot of Jews in one town for this ancient world. So anyway, I'm out of time. Thank you.